How you doing? It's Martin Lopez from the Curiosity Theory and from Martin Lopez Home Loans. And every Saturday morning, I'm trying to bring some great content out. And last week, I had the pleasure of hanging out online with my buddy Dylan, and we talked about a lot of things, man. We had a great conversation, didn't we?
I thought it was awesome. I was thinking back on it today, and there was so many different pieces and different directions we went in. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
That's cool. Let's do it. Okay, so let me just add this little guy over here and add my book back to it. And so one of the things that we covered last week, I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. I had something happen, little technical issues that kind of threw me off. Is last week we were talking about like manning up, and that took us into a direction of kind of like we both had different ways of looking at the whole idea of manning up. And then this week, we were talking, and it kind of led us to a conversation saying, what's the worst thing that can happen in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And a lot
There's
of
some
things.
bad things that can happen in a relationship. Let's be clear on that one.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get into that, and I'll let you start, and we'll go from there. Is that cool?
Yeah, I really kind of thought a lot about this question, and I could go in a lot of different directions. I've had some difficult and challenging relationships. I think everyone has. But I refined the worst case scenarios of all of these relationships. Different things happened, but the core problem was the same. The problem was that one party in the relationship loses themselves and their sense of who they are to the other person. And I believe for me, that is the worst thing that can happen. And I'll take ownership. I didn't know who I was in my last relationship. I think I had a passive personality, and I was kind of just going along for the ride. And when the other party decided to take left turns and right turns and go up hills and down hills and jump off cliffs, I was just kind of tagging along, and it caused massive devastation in all sorts of parts of my life. So that to me is the single worst thing that can happen, is not being clear enough in who you are, that you and your partner can work together as a third entity, as opposed to you merging with the other person and their desires and their direction.
That's really great. And when I kind of wrote the description, I was thinking that's like I have a lot of calls, talks, conversations with people every week, as do you. And it seems like a lot of people want to talk about what's negative. And so when they explain the relationships, I find that the majority of people are explaining the relationships, but they're talking about what doesn't work in the relationships. Or if they talk about what's positive in the relationships, that they get to what's negative fairly quickly. And so then there's a lot of like blaming, like it's that person's fault, it's that person. And it took me a long time to get out of that mindset of blaming somebody else for the things that I wanted in myself. And that was part of what I've learned in this book that I've been reading. Even though I've kind of known that in the background, the actual application of that in life is taken me a while to do.
Well, I think we've got this really negative part of our culture, and it's seen as a positive. And I'm going to call it the "you complete me" phenomenon. This idea that I am a half a person, and she or he or whoever is the other half the person. And somehow together we make one whole person. And this is wrong to me. And I've learned this the hard way. I think you're right. I think the blame and the finger pointing and the it's her fault, it's his fault, it's the circumstances is nonsense. It starts here. And the question is, are you coming in half full and expecting the other person to fill you up? Or are you coming up complete in and of yourself and asking somebody else who's complete to share a life with you? Because that's a different situation than trying to complete someone. I don't want to complete anyone. And no one else is going to ever complete me. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, but it seems to be the thing that so many people, strive for, like that other person's going to help complete them, that the other person's going to help them get to where they need to be, which is maybe a different version. I know my wife, Yvette, she helps me with a lot of things that I want to do. She helped me with my book. She helps with my program, Curiosity Theory. She even co-leads some of the courses. And that is like, really, really helpful. But she brings her own approach to relationships and to curiosity separate from mine. And sometimes I am challenged by, being able to separate that, being able to separate, what I think she should be doing, but when it's really something maybe I should be doing.
Well, I think let's create a different terminology for what you're talking about here, because Eric, you're so right. There's three. There's you, there's the other party, and there's the relationship as a whole. It is a third entity. I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just let's create a different terminology than what you're talking about. Is not you coming in half and her coming in half and you completing each other. You're talking about a partnership. And that's a completely different situation where I want my partner to bring things that I don't bring. And I'm going to bring things that she doesn't bring. And
Yeah.
together, that creates this third entity. That partnership where you can work together is different from this completion where it's like you have to fill something in for me that doesn't exist and that I can't function without you. It's
Yeah.
codependency. That's really what you complete me is codependency.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My wife and I make a joke. We always do. We haven't made that joke in a while, but we used to make a joke. Hey, we're codependent, you know. But I think that happens in relationships where you're where you learn the way that the other person is, quote unquote, like this person is that way, and you start operating them as though they're that way. And that loses all possibility, loses all curiosity, and all the fun that happens in life kind of goes away. So I think for me, one of the worst things that can happen in relationships, and I was thinking about that, is that when you start to think you know the other person, when you start to think that this person is that way or that way, and that's in any relationship. I think that's in a business relationship, or that could be just a friend, or in a personal relationship. Because I think what we start to do is we start to stop to see what's possible. Like, okay, if that person is this way, then that person's going to say no on this transaction or do this deal. Or my friend never.
It's this assumption. It's this assumption that you get into that I know you. And Martine, you and I have had a lot of conversations, but I walk into every conversation like you do, like I have no idea how he's going to respond to this. I have no idea what's going to come out of his mouth next. And I pride myself on being as unpredictable as humanly possible because I don't know what I'm going to say next.
Yeah.
I don't know what I believe until somebody prompts me or pushes up against me and I'm able to go, oh, let's see how I feel about that. Let's trust my gut and go there.
Yeah.
And that brings in this whole other possibility of assuming that you know that other person, and that's part of that codependence, means that you start to do things based on what you expect them to respond or react to. And maybe the last time they responded or reacted that way was a fluke. And now you're going to pin them that they are only going to like their guacamole spicy. From now on, they're always going. You just don't know that one day they wanted it spicy. They normally like it real mild, and you've now created this whole assumption.
Yeah.
About guacamole.
So you're not curious. You're not asking. You're not investigating. Like in the curiosity theory, we have something called curiously investigating. So it's about being curious as you're communicating to somebody to see where they are versus, I know the way that this person is, and so I'm not going to ask them this, or I'm not going to ask them, or I'm not going to suggest this.
Right.
And to me, that's like you had said, clarity is what you said is foundational. You didn't say foundational, but you said clarity is really important in relationships. And I believe that like when you're curious, when you ask people questions and when you approach it the way you're approaching, is that you're open. So that you can maneuver, and whatever shows up, however somebody answers, then, maybe you get triggered. I know I do. I'll get triggered, but then I wasn't attached to anything. And so this trigger may be for a whole other reason, maybe something that happened in a different relationship or a different transaction, a different, business situation. And I'm just bringing now that old situation here in the present, and that doesn't belong here because this person isn't the same person that I had a transaction with in the past.
And I think that's, I want to go deeper into that concept of clarity, because the idea is like, oh, well, I know who I am and I'm always going to be this way and I have complete clarity in my belief system. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to an understanding of who you are in the moment and in the second, so that when you are triggered, you have clarity about why you're triggered, who you're triggered by, what the real situation is. And even deeper, I believe that everything in every relationship and interaction that I'm in, it's my responsibility. How I show up, what I do, what I feel, what I say, I have to take ownership of it. And there are times I'm triggered and I say stupid things and I upset people. And then I have to take ownership and say, yeah, that wasn't you. I'm sorry. I was thinking about that past relationship and it got triggered. So clarity to me means understand you, do the work on you that you know how you feel, why you feel it, and you start to get so clarity,
Yeah.
so clear about your emotions that as soon as you feel them, you can trail them back and connect them to what's real, not what's in front of you, because what's in front of you isn't always why you're feeling that way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what's in front of you is another person with their own needs and maybe their own agenda and something that they want to get out. And when we're stuck on our agenda, when we're stuck inside of only what we want, we're certainly not listening to the other person. We're not, because we're so busy waiting to get the next word in to get that thing that we want.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because maybe you have an agenda. You have an agenda. I've got to accomplish this. But people are human beings, and sometimes other human beings have to get out what they need to get out first, because maybe they'll act like they listen to you, but if they're not complete, if they're not clear, if they haven't been listened to and gotten, they're going to forget what you had to say. You may say, okay, we're going to go, to Cows Mountain. We're going to go climb Cows Mountain tomorrow, and everybody needs to be there at 5:00, and okay. And you're just leading the charge, and you think everybody's agreeing. And somebody's like, well, I got a dinner meeting with, I've got to go have dinner with my kids. And the other person says, I have bad shoes. I got to go buy some shoes. And, so they haven't said, what they needed to say, but you were so gung-ho that they just didn't interrupt you, and you thought that they agreed with you, but you didn't give them the room. And that's, like, to me, that's a bad thing that happened in relationships. Like, what's the worst thing? That's something that happens in relationships, and it's a simple thing, but it happens all the time.
But that piece takes us right back to the beginning of at least what I'm bringing, of this idea of knowing yourself and really understanding your own belief system. Because when somebody loses themselves in a relationship, that can be part of how that happens, where you've got your agenda and you've got your motive, and you're not listening to the other person. You're 100% sure that they are on board with you, and you're making these assumptions, and you're running 100 miles in that direction, and the other person is afraid of losing you, is afraid of falling away from that relationship. And so they are going to follow, but they don't believe you. They don't agree with you. They don't want to go there, and they're afraid to say it. And next thing you know, you're the bully without even meaning to be, because that person wasn't clear in stepping up in the middle of the conversation and saying, I don't want to go to Cows Mountain. I want to go surfing. And would you like to go surfing with me? But they didn't bring it up, and they're going to blame you.
Yes.
For the fact that you had a direction, as opposed to looking inside and saying, he had a direction. Why didn't I say to him, that's awesome, go have a good time at Cows Mountain. I want to go surfing. You're welcome to join me. Which is that opportunity of saying, I know what I want, who I am, where I want to go. And do you want to come with me? Do I want to go with you? Let's have a conversation where we're both coming to it with our own understanding of what we want, as opposed to letting somebody else bend us because we don't have an opinion, and then we want to blame them. And it's frustrating, and it's not their fault. It's your fault.
Absolutely.
My fault.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely somebody's responsibility. And one way that we approach responsibility in our house in conversations is we say that you're 50% responsible for the conversation. So case in point, my son needed to get up to go to work yesterday. He didn't get up. He got in trouble, made him walk to work. So he ended up walking to work. He wasn't happy about it. It was early in the morning. He was going to take my car, and I said, no, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You're going to walk to work. He was really upset, thought I was a terrible human being. He walked to work. And in the afternoon, when we had a conversation, he said, I can be 100% responsible for what I did in the conversation, which is 50% of the conversation. Because Dad, you had 50% of this conversation. I said, absolutely. You're 100% right. I had 50% of the conversation. The way that I approached you may not have been the way to approach you at the beginning. So what we do in relationships is my point is that we build muscles, and then we build communication methods so that we can navigate, the conversations. Because let's face it, if you're going to be in any type of relationship, you're going to experience conflict. Doesn't matter if you're married, doesn't matter if it's a son or a neighbor. Every once in a while, you're going to experience some degree of conflict. And
I think the question is, you hit that conflict, because it is inevitable. Ownership of your own, and I know I keep coming back to me, but that's really where I live these days. Is how am I showing up? When you hit that conflict, you have to be clear in your triggers, your desires, You have to make sure that you're listening to the other person and not just bulldozing them.
Yeah.
And then there's this part of conflict that especially men don't really pay attention to, is some men go very caveman with conflict, and they go to the fight method, like, I'm going to bully this person down. And then some people run. It's that fight or flight thing happens with men a lot with conflict, and we're unconscious of it. And so it's like, either you're going to, like, I'm going to bear into you, or I'm going to disappear and just like hide and be afraid. And either one of those situations is going to make you're not going to avoid conflict by running from it. Yeah. You're just going to maybe you escaped it that day, but that same conflict's coming back tomorrow. And because you didn't address it today, it's worse. And then you get that challenge again. Well, now it's worse. Am I going to fight harder or run faster, as opposed to addressing it? Yeah. And there's this piece for me that I teach a lot of the clients that I work with. It's this concept that I call, if it's not there, bring it. The idea of if it's not there, bring it is this. Let's talk about a conflict. Let's talk about any situation. If you see something that's missing in that situation, in the conflict, the other person's not listening, you're not listening. When you are aware of something that's missing, it becomes your job to address that missing component. Mm-hmm. If you're not listening, you got to say, I just recognize that I didn't listen to your part. Will you please say it again? If they're not listening, you may have to say, and it's delicate in a conflict, but you may have to say, I don't feel like we're hearing each other. Can I say what I said again? And maybe you could listen a little differently, and I'll try and hear you differently. Identifying what's missing can alleviate that conflict, because the other person is probably feeling the same thing you're feeling, but hasn't put their finger on it. So if you know it's missing, it becomes your job to bring it.
Absolutely. That's great. That's a great distinction. That's really important. And the struggle, I think, and then where we find ourselves in these worst possible things that could happen in relationships, is because we haven't learned, like I said earlier, they haven't learned an idea. We're mostly trying to solve the problem in the problem. And that's mostly where people get in trouble, because it's an escalation of conflict. Like if I point my finger at you, well, you're most likely going to point back at me, and then it goes to the next level, and we keep taking it up to a higher and higher level. And then an hour later, we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. But the next time we go into the same situation, we do the same thing.
Right.
So you got to go. You got to go and prepare before those things happen. You got to take the classes. You got to go to workshops like your workshop, like my workshop, so that you can start to learn, like, how am I going to be able to foresee things? How am I going to be able to see a conflict coming down the road? Or when I'm in a conflict, when I'm in the moment of a conflict, how can I navigate that conflict in a way that everybody's served?
What's your best tool when you get into a conflict and it's heated and you recognize that your emotions are flared, and maybe it doesn't have to do with that other person, but you're now upset and triggered? What's your best tactic to bring yourself down so that the conflict doesn't escalate in that moment?
Well, if we think about what happens in a conflict, we're talking about that fight or flight, which is our reptilian brain. So we know when we're in a conflict, then the reptilian brain is who's driving the car. That's who's driving this conversation. Is either I need to fight, which is I need to win this thing, or I surrender, I run away. And like you said, both of those don't work, but there's still a reptilian brain that's running. Well, there's a way out of a reptilian brain, which is real simple. I call it the ABC pause, which is acknowledge. So acknowledge you're in a conflict. B is breathe. And C, apply curiosity. So be curious. So acknowledge, breathe, and curiosity. And the reason that the B works, the breathing, or actually what that does, is when we breathe, we engage our neocortex. And think about this: when we're in a fight, we're shallow breathing. When we're nervous, we're shallow breathing. And that is that's mostly kicking in our reptilian way, or kind of a winning formula, the way that we normally operate. We talk fast. We don't take a second to breathe. And I created this whole curiosity for myself because I needed to find a way to navigate conflict myself. And it just seemed to work. So then I started sharing it with other people. So, acknowledge, breathe, and curiosity. That's what I use.
I love that. I love that. I will definitely tap into that. It's not that different from the way I do it.
How do you do it?
I've spent 15 years in circles with men, and men get their emotions triggered in unexpected ways on a regular basis. So I've had men throw punches at me, get in my face, yell with spit coming out, like, out of their mouths, like so upset. And what I've learned is, and Clay Green would love this, you don't react. You don't get to the place where you're taking that energy and bouncing it in. What I am is I become Swiss cheese. And I just let it pass through me. I let their energy pass through me so that I'm not amplifying it. And then that breathing is key. There are situations where I might say, hey, listen, we've got to stop for a second. And I will physically take a step backwards, create some space, create some room, especially when it comes to men. The charge, the electrical charge between two men that are like face to face with each other, that's that fight technique. And if you just take a step back, it's not like I'm surrendering. It's just, hold on. Let's create a bigger room to hold that energy, because that energy is being created. It's a physical thing. And if you're right on top of it, that energy is bouncing and bouncing and bouncing and amplifying. And if you just give it a little more room, the other person's going to react to that energy shift. If you've ever been in a situation where the energy in the room has changed, positive or negative, you feel it on a level that has nothing to do with your brain.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you go, something's different.
Yeah.
And in that moment of that something's different, you can then ask a question. You can then change the direction. You can then take ownership or express yourself in a new and different way that can completely shift the conversation. As simple as, we don't need to fight about this. Let's just use something outside of that. I'll wrap with this. I've trained my kids on something that I learned long ago. The worst thing that you can ever do in any situation is panic. It's the worst thing. As soon as you get into that panic, that fight or flight, your brain, your higher processes, they're gone.
Gone, yeah.
Gone. You are a caveman. And there is no talking. And if you're in a relationship and that happens, you're kind of screwed. So what you have to do is recognize when you're in that panic space and do whatever you can to keep hold of your brain and your higher functions. And I love that you said apply curiosity. I think if you're in the middle of that and you can stop and take a step back and ask a question to the other person, even an irrelevant question where you're like, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
All of a sudden their brain has to kick in to explain, and they might step out of that fight or flight. And that might be the defusing you were looking for.
Absolutely, because our brains are vacuums. Like when we ask ourselves a question, we're going to have to figure it out. And so when you're in the middle of a fight, you're in the middle of a conflict, you're in the middle of something that's not working the direction you want it to work in, and you engage a question, if you're really curious, that comes across. If you're being manipulative, that's going to come across as fight. I'm manipulating you. I'm really in the fight mode still. Right.
You're trying to outsmart the person and trying to get an advantage and a leg up. And that's, I think people have this tendency to believe that we're pulling the wool over the other person's eyes, that what we're doing and our intentions and the way we're doing things are completely lost on everyone. And the reality is we're way smarter than that. And we make so many decisions based on like just body movements and presence and the muscles in our face. And, oh, well, he's clearly angry. We're making decisions that, faster than the fastest supercomputer. And you think you're fooling your partner?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Or that person you're in a battle with, you think you're fooling them? No.
Exactly.
Be legitimate. Be in integrity. Be in clarity of what you want, and be okay to find a compromise. Because somewhere down the road, someone's going to have to compromise. And if you're the one who's like, I am absolutely, my foot is down here and I will kill you if you try and move my foot, you're not getting out of that alive. Something's going to blow up. It's
a real tough one. It's a real tough one. And even if you get your way, and maybe you don't care. Maybe some people just don't care what another person thinks. And if that's their thing, my job isn't to tell you you're right or wrong. It's going to be my way, and that's it. And that's everybody's prerogative, is to do it their own way. You do it your way. However, if you're looking to have things work for a couple people, if you're looking to say this relationship's not going in the direction I'd like it to go, then take a look at yourself. Like, have some awareness, and how are you approaching it? How are you approaching the conversation? How are you approaching the situation?
And I think don't in that same like internal ownership. It's like, don't lie to them, and really don't lie to yourself. If you're saying, I'm going to back down because I don't really care about the result of this argument, but you do, don't lie to yourself, because you're going to get out of that argument, and the next day you're going to slam right back into it, and now it's doubled.
Yeah.
Because you lied to yourself the last time and you really did care. And this can happen with something as stupid as, hey, honey, where would you like to go have dinner tonight? And the person goes, I don't care, wherever you want. And then you say, well, how about Mexican food? The person goes, well, I really like Mexican food. Well, where do you want to eat? I don't care, wherever you want. No, you do care, because you just said you don't want Mexican food. So why don't you stop lying to yourself and own it? Are you afraid that I'm not going to want Thai food and you're going to want Thai food? Can we just have a conversation like two grown-ups here? But we spend so much time lying to the other person and thinking they don't notice it, and lying to ourselves because we don't have the clarity of what we want, who we are, what's important, what our values are, what our terms are. And there are places where you do need to fight. There are places where it's like a line in the sand where it's like, I'm not going to let you do something that harms my children. I have a line in the sand there. So if I'm in a relationship or a conversation or a fight, and backing down means that my children are being harmed in some way, shape, or form, I'm not backing down, but I'm clear that that's the line. It's not about whether we have Chinese food or Mexican food. It's that my children are allergic to Mexican food, and damn it all, I'm not going to Mexican food with them.
Yeah.
Bad example, but you know what I'm saying.
No, it's a good example. It's the ability to separate your ego from like a true physical or a true situation that can really harm somebody. So typically the first situations we were talking about is how our ego, how that codependency works, how our regular basic function of life with no guidance and no direction and no clarity work if we're just left to just kind of, yeah, where do you want to go eat? I don't know, where you want. And then we just continue that conversation. Well, chances are it's going to be a little, we're just floating around. But if we have some clarity, then we know, hey, I would like to go get some pasta. Okay, great. Well, what do you like? Well, I don't really like pasta. But we haven't been taught how to communicate in ways, and we don't take responsibility for the fact that we don't communicate well.
And I think part of it, I think it's huge. I think part of it is the fear of what they're going to say and what they're going to think and how they're going to react, which only matters if you're not clear on yourself. Because if I say to you, I love that this whole conversation has become where we're going to go eat, but how many arguments have you had about where are you going to go eat? Like I've had like a million of them.
Absolutely.
If I'm clear that I really am anti-pasta right now in my life, and I'm on a diet, and I can't have pasta, and I can communicate that clearly, and you really, really, really want Italian food, as long as we go to an Italian food place that has something that I'm going to be able to eat, I'm okay with it. But I can say that, and I can have that clarity. And if you say, hey, I must have pasta, and I'm like, I don't want to have pasta, the end result is, how about you go have pasta and I'll go eat somewhere else? Oh, and then that fight can be over. But it's having that clarity and of yourself, and knowing that what the other person's impression, opinion, decision, their own belief systems, if they're clear on themselves, I don't have to go have dinner with you tonight, Martine. It's okay. I don't mind if you go out and have dinner with another friend. I'll survive.
Yeah, but what about me? And then it really becomes some different thing that we don't identify. Well, what about me? I really want to go out to dinner. If you're not going to go out to dinner with me, who am I going to go out with? All this other stuff, which is that codependency thing, which comes out of
yourself. If you start to get triggered and you're like, but I really don't want to eat dinner alone, and you're who I want to eat dinner with, but I'm not saying that in a clear way. And it's like, well, why don't you want to eat dinner alone? Okay, let's talk about that. Let's get underneath the emotions. And I keep bringing it back to this because it's the key. The clarity of why you feel the way you feel. Outside of the reactions, outside of the impulses and the instincts, why do you feel that way? Mm-hmm. Are you afraid to have dinner by yourself? And what's that about? And maybe you need to do some work on yourself so that you don't need me to go have dinner. I have dinner. One of my favorite things, I will go take myself out to dinner. I'll go sit at the bar and I'll sit by myself. And I love not having to argue about where to go eat. And I remember fighting about, well, I don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
It's okay to be alone. I don't really care. I've addressed that concern and gotten underneath it now. So it's never going to be a fight anymore. You don't want pasta. Okay. I'll go to dinner by myself. I don't care.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll tell you the truth. I hate going to dinner by myself. So I'm like the guy going, I don't want to go to dinner by myself, So
why? Why don't you want to go to dinner by yourself?
we can have that separate conversation. Let's talk about we'll talk about there's a specific thing I want to get to. So yeah, there's a whole other conversation. The thing that I think happens is that, like you said, we don't have clarity. We don't have clarity in what we want to do, and that throws it off. And then the other part is we don't want to agree with the other person. Let me throw this in. We finish up on this one because I wanted to keep these under 40 minutes, and so let's finish this one, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about next. So yesterday, my wife and I were talking about Yvette and I were talking about something with our kids, and I was saying this is how I see it, and then she was saying she wanted to say how she saw it, like I see it this way. So we both saw it completely different ways, but we both wanted the best for our son, right? And then we started to talk about how we don't agree or how we don't acknowledge what the other person wanted because we believe that somehow we're agreeing with it. So if she says, I want X, Y, Z, and then I say, well, I want A, B, C, and so let's say she says, I want X, Y, Z, and I go, okay, I can see that you want that. Does that mean I just agreed we're doing that? And it's a
big question.
Yeah, that's another part of navigation. And I think a lot of people navigate through conversations but don't get clarity in that. And then how do you say to somebody, and I think you just say it because that's what we did yesterday. How do you say, I want to acknowledge what you say, X, Y, Z, and I want to acknowledge that I think it's A, B, C, but I understand that I just want you to acknowledge that that's what I'm saying. I'm not agreeing with you and you're not agreeing with me. Are we good with that? And both Yvette and I were like, yeah, I'm good with it. I'm good with I see it one way and I'm good with you see it a different way. We don't agree on the same way. But
here's this key point of that, right? It's allowing the acknowledgement and the sharing of the conversation and having the conversation. So here's a crazy thought for you, okay? Mm-hmm. It's entirely possible for two people to have completely differing opinions and both be right.
Absolutely.
And it's entirely possible for two people to have completely differing opinions and both be wrong. And we have this assumption that because I believe this and you believe that, I'm right and you're wrong. And that creates all this problem. Whereas really, we could both be right. It could be ABC and XYZ. And if we can start to talk about it and bring that conversation up, you can see how, ABC and XYZ aren't actually bipolar opposites, but we've been taught in this world of duality. It's either hot or it's cold. It's either good or it's bad. It's either right or it's wrong. And the truth is 99% of things are like some random shade of gray in the middle.
Yeah.
Black and white is not really the 100% truth all the time. It's very possible you're both wrong or you're both right. And if you can come to that argument or that conversation from the perspective of, let's explore this.
Yes.
As opposed to my agreeing with you means that I'm wrong, or you're agreeing with me means I'm right. I don't know who's right or wrong. Let's take that out of the conversation and let's just talk about it. Yeah. Why do you think that's right?
Yeah.
Why do I think that's right? Can we find the why that meets in the middle and we can both have what we want?
Yes, and absolutely. And sometimes what we're saying doesn't have any action beyond that. We're just saying it. Right. It's very complex. When you think of the question, what's the worst thing that can happen in relationships? It's probably relationships. That's probably the answer, Like what's the worst thing that can happen in relationships is you're in a relationship. And
oddly, that's also the best thing that can happen in a relationship is that you could get into relationship.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Cool.
It's this bipolar piece of like, you want to be your own individual, but none of us, no man is an island. We all are on this planet and in this existence with other people. And we're going to have to find ways to come to the middle. Otherwise, what we see in government is going to be our future reality where it's either you're right or you're wrong. And there used to be a middle ground.
So how about this? How about next week? Because I think that what I believe is the way that we identify what's right or what's wrong, or the way that we navigate is through feelings. Feelings are how we decide, does this work for me or does this not work for me? And we go, how do I feel about this? You know, we look at numbers on a paper and we say, well, the numbers, it's just a numbers game. But you still look at the numbers and there's a deciding factor. And I believe that's feelings. And it could be a subtle feeling or a deep feeling. Or why did I marry this person? Or why do we want to have more kids? Or why do we want to go there? We're always looking to our feelings, but we don't necessarily discuss feelings, especially men don't discuss feelings. So how about next week? And you do. That's where I'm getting to. Yeah. So how about we explore the myths of feelings, like what, the myth about why we don't talk about feelings and actually talk about what feelings are and how they can
I think it's a great conversation. And I just want to pop this seed into the soil of your fertile brain for a moment. The myth of men's feelings versus women's feelings. Because women live, in most cases, the feminine experience is an emotional experience, while the masculine experience is a logical experience. Every woman can tell you how she's feeling about everything at any given moment, and most men have not got a clue as to how they ever feel unless they're mad. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that difference between the masculine, feminine experience of emotions.
That's awesome. And this is what I love about you and me, is that my experience is that we all have them. And I don't define it that way. I define it a different way. So let's, like you and I, we both talk about our avenues. That's why you're on this side, and that's why I'm on this side. And then we get to both have a conversation that moves forward about feelings, about the myths of feelings, about the masculine and feminine. And I talk about something called yum or yuck, and it'll make a difference for people.
Fantastic. I love it. I look forward to it.
All right,
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate you hanging out. And how can people get a hold of you?
Well, you can check out my website, northstarman.com. I've got monthly membership courses where I meet for 90 minutes twice a month and we get deep into stuff like this, but also motivation and inspiration. That's really the best way to get me. You can check me on my Facebook. There's a lot of stuff there. I'm right in the middle of a very cool 100-day goal where every day for the next, almost 80 days, I'll be writing an original piece and posting it on Facebook. And it's a great way to engage with your muse. If you're looking for a better connection to your artistic expression, check that out and go right to my Facebook page and take a look at it.
Awesome. And again, my name is Martin Lopez. You guys probably all know me because you're on my Facebook page. I do two things. One of the things I do is I'm a loan officer. So I help people get mortgages when they buy houses, and that's what I do. And I love that. And as a result of all the stuff that I went through in that and in life, I wrote a book called
The Curiosity
Theory, and I teach classes helping people navigate through communication and conflict. So get a hold of me. You can find out more about my book on thecuriositytheory.com. And if you are interested in buying a house or getting refinanced, you can get a hold of me just right here on Facebook. Thanks a lot. We'll see you guys all next week.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.